Our guest on this week's episode is Anne Pereira, and she is a professional home organizer.
I know what you're thinking. You are thinking boxes and labels, but it's so much more than that. Anne specializes in working with the neurodivergent population and how to best organize their space for the way that they think.
Yeah, and this episode is fascinating because she talks about how the organization of our external world, our physical spaces, reveals inner workings of our brain.
So join us and learn more about conscious clutter.
Anne Pereira is the owner and founder of House of Projects, LLC, which helps people discover peaceful balance in their space through thoughtful decluttering and intentional organization. What makes Anne and her company unique is their special focus on challenges encountered by older adults, neurodiverse people, and people in the midst of life transitions. Anne combines her professional and personal life experience to help clients with challenging disorganization. Anne is the mom of 5 kids. She's a special needs parent, a homeschooler, and former nurse practitioner. Thank you, Anne. We're so happy to have you. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
This is going to be so fun because Andrea and I don't know much about this particular niche you're in. So if you wouldn't mind, could you share how you got into this niche within the organizational services that does service people of a neurodivergent background?
I kind of stumbled into organizing. I took time off of having a career to be a mom to my 5 kids. And when I felt like there was enough time and margin in my life to do something outside the home, a friend of mine invited me to come along on an organizing job to help pack a person for a move. And so I thought, well, why not? I'll try it and see what this is about. And the first client that I worked with definitely was neurodivergent, and I realized that there was a lot going on for this person that I didn't understand, and I really wanted to help, but I could tell that the kind of help that would be helpful to me was not going to be helpful to her, that she needed some kind of unique approach. So that inspired me to learn more and get more education about how to help people whose brains work differently with organizing their space. So I joined the Institute for Challenging Disorganization, which is like a global organization.
Wow.
That their mission is to mainly provide education for all kinds of professionals as to how to work with people that have different challenges around organization, whether that be like productivity or physical organizing, working with seniors, working lots of different things. So, yeah.
When you first sat with that first client of yours that was neurodivergent, what things did you see that made you realize, I can't connect with this person like my traditional way of organizing?
Right. Well, it started right when we opened the front door.
Oh.
And I had to do kind of a neutral face, because it was so much chaos in the physical environment. And there were no categories or groups. It was very, very random, very colorful. I could tell this was a really creative person and a really fun person. And so, and it was a stressful time because moving is stressful. So that also can amplify any challenges people have. Of course, for all of us under stress, we don't operate at our best. So and then as the more I've done this work, the more I find it really rewarding when I see a big challenge. I think, wow, this, and if the person is really ready to receive help and open to new ideas, it's a lot of fun to work with them. So
that's great. We should probably back up and define for anybody who doesn't understand or hasn't heard that term, neurodivergent. Can you define what that is?
Yeah, I think I love this word. It's a very inclusive term to describe any features that someone might have cognitively or behaviorally that might not fall in the center of the bell curve of occurrence in humans. So instead of using the word abnormal and normal, like that's very polarizing and also not very helpful. Like, what really is normal? It's more just differences. So
Right.
that can be a way of defining something that needs to be understood and accommodated and supported, but it doesn't need to be necessarily fixed. We're not saying that it's broken or abnormal.
So would the inverse of that be neurotypical
Yes.
versus neurodivergent? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
And some people like to call it neurospicy.
Ah,
I
They
like
will
that.
I like that one
self-identify
too.
as I'm a neurospicy individual, and that's kind of a fun way to embrace
That
that
is
you
fun.
might do things differently,
Absolutely.
and just find what works for you.
Who might fall into a category of neurodivergent, which I even feel like that's not right to say category, but who
Right.
might
Well, who might
identify
identify?
that? Yes, yes.
Someone with ADHD, that being one of the more common ones you might hear, or someone with on the autism spectrum, even people with memory problems or dementia. We could put, also fit that description.
So you may be neurotypical at some point in your life and then end up being neurodivergent at
As your brain changes
yeah,
and your needs change. Yeah.
yeah.
That is interesting. You know, this is funny. This just occurred to me. If your purpose walking in somebody's front door is to help them reorganize, and that person called on you because they knew it was time to tap out and ask for help, is it very common then that you are naturally encountering a neurodivergent individual, that's typically the person who needs you?
I have found that to be true. I think in the world of organizing, there are different types of clients and different specialties for sure. So some people are pretty organized. They just don't, they want a more higher aesthetic look to their space, and they want
Oh, yeah.
more of a design focus, or they just don't want to spend the time, or, for other reasons. And it is kind of fun. Sometimes I'll go to a person's house and I come in and it's the opposite of chaos. And I think, well, what am I going to do here?
What do you need me for?
Because this looks really good. So I'm not sure. But, then we talk more and find out what it is, they do need help with, and I can help. But
That's
but
also
it
a
is a
different
little
personality.
unsettling to me when I'm like, oh, wow, this looks good. I don't know if I can
Yeah.
improve on what's happening. So, yeah, but then there are other people who, yeah, definitely are. And then, so yeah, by definition, to help someone organize, they may have something going on that's making organization really challenging.
I remember my daughter has ADHD, and I didn't really realize that until she was, I don't know, probably about 10 or 11. And I remember trying to clean her room with her, and we would get everything in what I thought was a very organized manner. Okay, we're going to put stuffed animals in this bucket. We're going to do this and we're going to do that. And she would get very anxious that I was moving her stuff, first of all, around. And then it lasted a whole whopping, 4 days, maybe.
The organization.
The organization. Yeah.
Yeah.
It just, and then it went back to what was more comfortable, I guess, to her. Now that I look back, to me, it looked like it was just a mess. But I think that as she's grown, I've looked at it, and I've looked at like how her father has his desk and there's everything out. And it's almost like if it's not out, they won't remember it.
Yeah.
Right. And I think, Andrea, you're touching on a great aspect of different ways of thinking and different organizing styles that a lot of times people who have a different style are very visual processors. And so for us to go put things away or put them even in bins that aren't clear, or in putting papers in a folder that's in a drawer, it's very unsettling to them, because they really need that visual cue to know where it is, and also to they even use that as a method of kind of maintaining their priorities when they're doing tasks or work. So that's one thing that's great to identify right up front is, and when you walk into a space, a lot of times those clues are already there for you, like to see. And that's, I think, a fun part of what I do is I don't want people to pre-clean before I come, because that actually erases a lot of the clues that are there in the
that's
space that help me know, like,
a good point.
this person really needs, I'm looking at, well, what is out? What is on this top layer that, they're using this as a support, even if they don't realize it. Because if, or even sometimes people will have empty boxes or wrappers, and I'm seeing that as recycling and trash, and they'll say, no, that's to remind me I'm out of that thing and I need to buy more. And so don't throw that away because I won't remember.
Gosh, thinking about that brings up for me that, because I met you because I needed some organizational help, and to have you come into my house and me not pre-clean
Oh, I was just
I don't think that would happen, number one, because that is such a vulnerable experience for me, I would assume for most of your customers and clients. For you to come and see my physical space and how disorganized it is, I would be embarrassed, and I would want to try to hide that. So it just reminds me the work you do isn't just to come in and provide a concrete service. It's to sit with somebody in their vulnerability, which takes a really special
Absolutely.
person.
Yes.
Yeah. I did pre-clean before you came to my house.
I should have told you not to.
Hell no, you can't see that stuff.
Well, if I go back and I think, like, why do we probably get so anxious about those things? Probably because when we were younger, people didn't understand the differences in the way, the differences in thinking patterns, the differences in organization. So you and I and all of us in our age group were brought up that things had to be tidy, they had to be neat, and it was you were going to be judged if somebody walked into your space and it wasn't tidy and neat. What I'm hoping is, as we're seeing with the growth of all mental health, is that our children now are going to see opportunities in ways to better themselves moving forward and make things more workable for themselves, not necessarily presented for other people.
Absolutely. And I think that's such a great point is for us as parents of kids who have different thinking styles and different organizational styles is to create healthy narratives around how they're made. And that just wasn't available. Like, that concept wasn't really available even 10 years ago, 20 years ago. And often cleanliness and organization have been kind of enmeshed in kind of a moral and character issue. And one author I just love, a resource that I always recommend to people, Casey Davis. She's a therapist, a person with ADHD, and she wrote an amazing little book called How to Keep House While Drowning. So this is her book. It's a bestseller.
Oh, I would definitely get that.
And I almost wish she would have titled it something other than How to Keep House, even, because that kind of is triggering to some people, I think, because they're thinking, I don't want to keep house. That sounds, that goes back to this like feeling
Homemaker.
defeated and the moral issue. But she really emphasizes that the way you handle things in your space and in your life and in your home is a functional issue that should serve you instead of a moral issue that has some standard that we all need to be striving for, because and then feel shame and defeat when we don't achieve some universal standard of cleanliness and organization. So I think she does a great job of unpacking some of that. And I think we as parents can be curious about our kids and how they operate and work on having those narratives of like that are supportive and helping them get to a place where they're functioning well, and then they're not feeling the shame and the frustration or disappointment of the parent because things don't look a certain way.
Yeah,
Such a
I'm
great
sure it's
point.
very individualized, but are there certain general trends or themes you could describe that we might see in an individual with ADHD or autism or other?
Yes, like just even themes. If you think about the domains of executive function, because usually that's the area that's going to be different for people with different brains.
Can
And
you
so I
explain
don't
what executive
know.
function is?
Right. So
Sorry.
executive function is the skills that happen in the front part of your brain that there's, I guess, 8 different, I'm looking at a little reference chart so I don't forget. There's 8 different domains of executive function. It's working memory, like keeping things in the front of your mind, like why did I come in this room? What was I going to do there? That's working
Mm-hmm.
memory. Self-regulation, planning and priorities, task initiation, impulse control, emotional control, flexible thinking, and organization.
Okay,
So
thanks for that.
those are the areas that we can, and so it helps to kind of take a look at those different areas. And usually people are strong in some and not as strong in others, and figuring out how to capitalize on those strengths to help support the areas where they struggle.
That's
So
helpful.
so for families and kids, they might I think one huge thing that was so helpful for me to learn is oftentimes in older kids and adults, their problem is not that they don't know what to do or even how to do it. It's the getting started part. It's the initiating a task that is so difficult, and it's an actual brain-based struggle where there's not enough neurotransmitter called dopamine happening in their frontal lobe. And that is what we need to get started and sustain a task. So we have to figure out strategies of ways to tap into our motivation to kind of juice that system and get us actually started. And oftentimes, once a person gets started on something, then they're good to go. But it's just that the task initiation can be really, so with kids, that means don't say go in your room and I want you to start cleaning it for 15 minutes. And that can be like so overwhelming to a kid because they're overwhelmed, right? They see a big mess. They don't maybe naturally have a sense of categories in what they're seeing. They don't have a way to break a big task into smaller parts that feel doable. So as parents, we can support in a bunch of ways, some of them being to work alongside your child, like Andrea described. And as they get older, maybe step back a little bit, but always at least help with the initiation part, because that might be one of the hardest parts, is to get started, and then helping them break things down into doable pieces. So they feel some quick wins on the front end, and that will help them kind of stay in the task a lot longer and feel more successful.
That's great advice.
So oftentimes when I try to organize myself, like I go into a closet, I am very motivated at the very beginning. There must be a lot of dopamine flooding my little brain.
Yeah.
But then I get into the middle of it, and there is pure chaos around me. And I know I would consider myself fairly, I wouldn't say I'm completely ADHD, but I have a little bit of ADD there somewhere. But I would say I'm not severely ADHD, but I can't imagine being down that and then being in the midst of chaos when
Right.
your child or even adult is in the midst of chaos. Then what do you do? How do you help continue that process so that they're not sitting in more chaos than what they were in
Right.
before?
And it gets worse before it gets better, right?
Yes.
And
Yeah.
I think that's good to also talk to our kids about that. Like, it's going to feel worse maybe, or overwhelming, when we pull all this out and we, kind of have a plan in place. Like, sometimes even I notice when I'm working with clients, they will not want to stop because they are afraid they won't go back and get, so
Yes.
they won't eat, they won't drink. And like, I'm over here bringing them something to eat and drink because I know they're going to run out of energy. And so I think one thing that you're identifying even is doing it alone can sometimes be not a great strategy, right? So enlisting the help of a non-judgmental, supportive friend can be really great. And often I've noticed too that the parent-child dynamic can be difficult sometimes, and recognizing if that's happening for you, maybe it is better to enlist the help of someone else that's not the parent in certain areas, because the child will take the feedback a little better, and the parents not getting, sometimes the parent child are sharing these struggles because there are genetic and behavioral and all these things involved with that. So just enlisting the help of a person that's not as emotionally invested, or
Yeah.
part of that dynamic can really make it go a lot better. And I have one client who was able to actually spell that out for me. And she said, I want you to come work with my daughter, because for her and I to try to tackle her room together is going to go so badly. But her daughter's delightful, and we had the best time. And we were able to, make a ton of progress in her space in like 2 hours, because, it's just different when it's not the parent.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
And again,
Absolutely.
talking to that vulnerability aspect, I think along the line, also what goes along with that is the feeling that you're being judged
Yeah.
or evaluated. So, yeah.
And
that
there
makes
can
sense.
be a long history of frustration on the part of the parents, and
Right.
frustration on the part of the child. And those are tender places, and it's hard. And we want to be safe places for our kids. And sometimes just inviting someone else in there to support us both can really go a long way.
Yeah.
Well, you homeschool, right? Is that
I
what
used
yes.
to. Yeah, I
You
was a
used to.
former homeschooler. Yeah.
Okay, so I homeschooled for 1 year for my daughter,
Okay.
and she was in 8th grade. And I remember saying, I have to hire a tutor who actually turned out to be an ADHD specialist. I didn't realize that at the time. I was so fortunate. But I hired her to cover those subjects that I knew would create tension. I was like, I need to protect my relationship with my daughter more so than be her teacher at that point, because
Absolutely.
it's a very similar parallel there. You're getting into a vulnerable space, and where it can be judged, it's tough.
Yeah. And it's probably hard to
Absolutely.
get to that point where you, as the parent, have the ability to see that and say, I'm going to take a step back. What did that
Especially
take for
in
you, Andrea? I mean, how did you get to that point?
Because, well, in all reality, she was what, 12, 13, whatever 8th grade is. And I had already been through several years with her of going to school, and I was fearful of homeschooling because of that dynamic. I knew that she thought differently than I did. And so I wanted to just, I don't know. I don't have a very good answer for that, other than it was experience of just knowing at that point that
Yeah.
she thinks differently than I do.
Yeah. Well, when Anne came to my house, I remember, and we were initially talking about closets and things, but you made some comments that to me just seemed like you must be a psychic, an organizational psychic, because you totally nailed it when you described what my desk and office might look like. And when you open my computer, what did my screen look like? There were some very specific things you spoke to. And I do have some special brain spice, I know, that leads me to do these things. But can you talk to some of those? I don't know if you remember those, but something that would show us like a computer screen, how might a neurodivergent individual's computer screen look like, or the surface of their desk. You even talked about clear bins versus solid bins, things like that.
Kind
That'd
of
be
going
super
back
helpful.
to that visual processing and having things visible as a support, as a cue that, like multiple tabs open on your browser. And some people might joke like, that's kind of what my brain looks like. I've got a lot of tabs
Yeah.
open all the time, and I'm kind of jumping between them. And so
Is that bad?
when
Because people tell me when I was working in a corporate office and someone would look over my shoulder, they would shame me for having all those tabs open. But you made it seem like it was okay, and
well,
and I
and I
was all
think
right.
if I guess the way to answer that would be to ask yourself, is this working for me in terms of being successful in what I'm trying to accomplish? Can I find what I need in a reasonable amount of time without a lot of stress and frustration? Are these multiple tabs distracting me from the things I'm really trying to get done, or are they supporting me in the things I'm trying to get done? And sometimes with ADHD, especially, I think because our brains are craving dopamine and this like novelty and motivation kind of things to keep us going, it kind of sometimes helps people to move from one task to the next and kind of bounce around, because sustaining the same task for like 5 hours is very challenging. But if you kind of, and again, this is a tricky balance to have, because we can also really diminish our success by doing too many things at once and dividing our attention too much, and it wastes a lot of energy. But if you're finding a happy balance with shifting tasks often enough to keep yourself engaged and you're still, getting things done, can be really, I think, a great strategy, which would be definitely not what a traditional productivity person might say is the way to do it. But there
I
really
think
isn't
that
one way.
visual piece is so interesting.
And also on the other end of that, in ADHD, people can get very hyper focused on one thing that's super interesting, and then they might need some support in putting limits on the time that they're going to spend on something, because otherwise, and I'm not that interested in diagnosing people, or, I mean, that's not even in my job description, but
Right.
just recognizing like, these are the things I tend to do, and knowing that about myself or about my child, now I can figure out ways to, give support or have strategies to not get off track, because
Right.
I tend to hyper focus on something, and then I'll spend 8 hours researching some really ridiculous product on Amazon that, because and now I've, lost track of all these other things that I wanted to get done. So putting some limits on things where we tend to get too invested, and then, putting that block in place of something that we're excited about when we're not as invested. So,
Yeah. So how are you able to walk in and identify how to optimize a space or a system for another individual without them saying, this is how a kid or even myself, I wouldn't know how to say, hey, Anne, this is how my brain works. Da, 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 da.
Right.
How do you come in and know what that brain craves, needs, or wants?
Maybe I don't always know. And sometimes, I'll always ask, well, what are the pain points? What are the things that have made you reach out for help? And, and talking through that. And then I think I like to approach it as what I like to call a set of mini experiments, because sometimes it's trial and error to figure out what's going to work best for a person. And then there's no sense of failure if the first or second thing we try doesn't work, because it's not about you trying to achieve some standard. It's just about you trying something and seeing how it goes, and then making adjustments from there. So there's just a little bit less of a sense of failure if something isn't amazing, I guess. So.
What are some strategies after someone has been able, let's just take a child's room, after that you've cleaned up the child's room and you've organized it to their comfortability? Is that a word?
Comfortability.
I don't think that's,
we could do it.
Okay, that's whatever. After you've organized it to their comfort, in helping them keep it that way.
To kind of maintain. Yeah.
To maintain.
Well, and that's where I go back to, when it falls apart, I like to look at like, well, what is it? Where is the default here? Like, one parent said they always dump their dirty clothes right here outside the laundry room door, and I just can't stand it. And so I said, let's find a laundry basket that has a really small footprint, that has the tall vertical, that you are happy with the way it looks, and just put it right there. And maybe that's not really where you want your laundry basket, but it might be a reasonable compromise, because now you're seeing clothes in the basket instead of a big pile on the floor. And that's a big improvement from where we started. And maybe they're just not going to take, whatever. And same thing with like closet doors. Like, I've taken the closet doors off of most of my kids' closets because
Oh.
they were these sliding, it's just a basic small closet with those sliding doors. But it was so hard it just wasn't helpful. Like they want to just see the clothes, and then they do a good job of hanging them up, and they actually want to like make them look a certain way. This is, my teenagers, not younger kids, but for whatever reason that worked better for them. And then we weren't
Wow,
always
that is-
struggling with those stupid doors. I don't know, it just drove me crazy.
That's interesting.
And then one of my children who has ADHD and autism, he has, I've tried a kind of just open container system for his clothes because, for one thing, the closet space in his room is pretty limited, so it's not that helpful. And I think and I definitely noted this with my kids when they were little, something about putting clothes on hangers is very complex for younger kids, at least for mine. It just was impossible for them to do. And so I resorted to the open bins or to hooks. People will throw things on hooks way more readily than they will put things on hangers. So, and some people just don't want to fold their clothes, or they won't, they just don't, that does not motivate them, right? They're not feeling inspired to do that. So creating open bins, and then they just put the clothes by category, like pants, shirts, socks, underwear, in the bins. And then their clean clothes they can find what they need, and they can quickly put them away with that kind of system. And that allows them to maintain it because it's not too complicated. There aren't visual or physical barriers that somehow prevent them from starting the task or from seeing what they need. And it just seems to work for them. So
Wow, that's great. What helpful hints or other systems would you suggest for those of us with kids that tend to be a little forgetful about grabbing a couple things before they leave, or getting a homework assignment with them before they leave?
I think creating a physical place in your house where all of their essential items live, and then you as the parent, like essential items, like I'm saying, to leave the house, like to go to school, and then you as the parent can support the child in getting those things in that place the night before, so that there is less drama in the morning with finding the shoes, finding the backpack, the coat, the musical instruments, all of that. And then same thing when they come home, like we call it, I guess I've heard it called like a drop zone, basically, in your house.
Oh,
where
cute. Yeah.
those things can be, again, a lot of times kids come home and it's like the school vomited all over your living room or family room. There's just backpacks and shoes and coats. It's just all everywhere. And so, and it's unfortunate. I feel like our homes aren't often designed to support this process, right? So we have to get creative, and it maybe doesn't always visually have the best aesthetic, but it functionally serves us so well to have some kind of hooks and a bin or something where everything kind of lives. So that
Every house. I'm sorry. Every house needs a mudroom. Do you have
It
those
really
in
does.
California? You do? Do you have those, Andrea, in California?
No, we don't have
it's
mud.
not as muddy.
That's
We don't have mud. We don't have snow boots. Yeah, but a mudroom. That's the drop zone. That's where you walk in and you drop your backpack, you drop your keys, the mail. My whole kitchen is a drop zone right now. It drives me crazy.
Kitchen
I'm also
counters.
not active about organizing it. It's so frustrating. I think it's so frustrating, and it's such a source of shame. I totally identify with those kiddos that just feel like, they just can't get their shit together. I feel like that at my age still. I want things to be organized, but I'm not doing it naturally. And I'm so hard on myself. So hard on myself.
And what an opportunity to change the narrative, Emmy, because
come on over.
and take a step back and say, something about this isn't working for me. Instead of saying, I'm not working for a clean house or I'm not doing this right,
You're right.
it's that
See, I love
something
that.
about this is not set up for the way I need it to function. So how can I where are the barriers? How can I take away whatever, like for the mail, people will make a pile of mail. It feels overwhelming because different reasons, but I always am like, put a recycle bin and a shredder, like right where you walk in the door, maybe, or in wherever it is that process tends to fall apart. And now
Oh,
you've
good.
removed a barrier to, I have to go into the basement to the shredder, and that's a lot of work, and I'm going to forget why I went down there, so I'm just going to put this here and deal with it later. So kind of removing those barriers. Now I can just stand there and put all the junk mail in the recycling, open the things that need to be dealt with, put them on my desk, and now I don't have, there's no more steps, right? Removing
Yeah.
unnecessary steps or
Yeah.
locations to make
It's
that
just a
happen.
matter of taking the time to address the symptoms and put some systems in place.
Right. And it doesn't have to be all or nothing. It doesn't have to be, I have to fix this all at once and do it exactly perfectly. Like, what is one small thing you could try? Like, thinking of it that way. Like, what are small pieces of this that I could think about instead of it being like this big, huge monster that I have to tame, you know,
Yeah.
which is very
overnight?
overwhelming.
It
And
Yeah.
what
is.
I love, because you keep on coming back to the functional aspect of your home. And I know that in our family, we have different dynamics, right? Of what reduces anxiety and what increases anxiety. And creates anxiety for some people in our family. And chaos is actually what I would appear. Obviously, I'm the one with the chaos that gets the anxiety here. Let's be honest. But then what I perceive as chaos is actually anxiety reducing for a couple of people in the family.
Oh,
Right.
can you give an example? I don't mean to be like
No,
peering
no, no,
into
no.
your
Yeah,
life,
pick
but
into
what,
my personal life,
yeah,
Amy.
just
That's
like
okay.
one little example.
So one little example is, let's say, the kitchen counters. So I like it, and it doesn't have to be my whole house. It really is my kitchen. I like everything to be put away. I like it to be cleaned off on the top and really almost bare. I don't get that, because my anxiety is a little less than a couple of other people's house, and they like to have things out. Like, well, if I'm going to use the coffee maker with all the accessories of the coffee, why do they need to be put away?
Because I
And
want it right within reach.
because I want it right
Part of
within
that
reach.
task. Yeah.
Exactly, Anne. So that very minimal example,
Right. It's a
what
great
would
example.
what would you say would be a way in a family to help create, I don't know,
Some
equity,
harmony.
harmony
Compromise
Yeah.
too. Yeah.
in the house, so that
Right.
everybody's needs are being met, and everybody's, anxiety, because I would think that most of this is really driven by anxiety, whether it's the shame of it not looking good, or it's whether things are not within reach. There's just a level of anxiety that gets that, and you want your home to be a calm place. So what would
Yeah.
you
Right.
suggest, and how to tackle differences in or thinking
Right.
about
I think
organization?
there's a couple of different um, ways to look at this. One is there's your space, my space, and there's our space, right? So people should have some places that allow them to function the way they need it to, right? Their personal spaces. If that's your desk, if it's your bathroom counter, in the kids' bedrooms, right? Like allowing people to, with kids, to an appropriate amount of control over how they use the space and the things in it. And so, and having those kind of defined in your mind too, because sometimes moms, I've noticed, are like allowing kids items that are valuable to them to live in common spaces, and it's creating anxiety because there's too much of it. It's too much chaos. So then it's okay to say, those things can live in that child's room. If that's important to them, but it's creating anxiety for you, then it's okay for them to keep that item, but put it in a place where now they're owning it and maintaining it in their space. And then for shared spaces like the kitchen counter, a series of mini experiments to maybe find a compromise, because people that need the visual support they're just going to have a hard time with everything put away. So some level of compromise could be achieved by having those coffee accessories maybe in some kind of container that lives next to the coffee maker, so a little bit of containment so it doesn't grow and spread to where now I can't use the counter for other tasks that need to happen in the space. And in your personal space, having the horizontal surfaces clean, because that allows you to think and focus on one thing at a time, and it makes it feel calm and peaceful. That's something for sure to embrace and be able to do in the places that you can.
Yeah. Luckily, Amazon now has all these designer level organizational contraptions that look wonderful on kitchen services. You know, you see all those bottles and labels, and yeah, really helping us out there. Thanks, Amazon.
Absolutely.
I get overwhelmed with all of those though, because I have so many of those. I'm like, oh,
you do?
that one looks good. That one looks good. That one looks good. That one looks good.
I can't.
More containers are not the answer, right? And people that struggle with organization, sometimes that they're, we turn to that as the solution, but a lot of times the containers end up being just more stuff to manage.
Yeah,
that's true.
A lot of times, and every organizer would tell you, people have too much stuff. And so that's like a whole nother podcast really that we could to talk about how to decide. And then that's a big part of what we do as organizers is support our clients in that decision-making process that can be overwhelming to do alone, on how to think about my space and my items differently, so that I don't feel like I need to keep all of it, because the amount of stuff that we have often makes maintenance difficult when there's just too much.
Yeah.
And same with kids. Kids get overwhelmed with having access to too many toys at one time, right? It's just impossible to maintain any kind of system if there's just so many objects physically in the space. So that's another tip, and something I did with my own kids when they were little was having like a rotating bin system and putting away like 80% of the toys in bins and just keeping, certain ones available, and then rotate them. So you preserve that novelty, and now it's fun again because I haven't seen it for a month. And, or even exchanging toys with friends that have kids of a similar stage, where the things feel new and we play with them. And then when you start noticing the things laying around and not being played with anymore, then they go away and new things come out. And it's once you find that happy threshold of items to maintain in your space, it helps tremendously.
Wow, that's a great nugget. I'm struggling with one of my kids, and we have his whole life, and my kid now is almost 21. He can't get rid of anything. So what are good, how do you pose a great question or situation to your child that helps them delineate when they're ready to get rid of something?
I think with kids, I'm not sure how to answer that. I more readily would be able to answer that with adults. Examining the reasons why you're keeping items. Like sometimes there's a sense of guilt or obligation, or the just in case, or I need to dispose of it a certain way. And if I can't do it a certain way, like environmental reasons or whatever, then I kind of just, it feels like too much. So I'll just keep it for now. So I think it is really important with kids to allow them to have a sense of control over their possessions, because trying to take over that is going to create more anxiety. And that's true, of course, with adults as well. But I think a lot of problems can become bigger if you try to just take over, and it's very upsetting, right? So having and there was a discussion on a organizing forum recently talking about this, like how much say should kids have in
Yeah.
how their space is maintained. And I think kind of walking alongside your child and allowing them to have choices, especially in their personal space. And that's where it comes back to having boundaries on what's your space, my space, and our space, and allowing your child to have an appropriate amount of autonomy in their space, and then helping them kind of see the consequences of, now I can't find things, or kind of having some natural experiences with those different strategies, and then maybe experimenting with different choices about, reducing the amount of things, or you're welcome to keep all of those things as long as they fit in your room, until they finally, maybe decide they want their room to feel different or look different, and then they can try a different strategy and make some of those difficult choices.
I think that question about why are you keeping this, or what does it mean to you, is really good. I can even pose that to my son. But he actually, and my kids and I have joked, we all tease each other about our funny quirks. But yeah, he gets such anxiety with the thought of releasing something to this day. So I have bins and bins of, essentially, if he's not, hope he doesn't listen to this, just junk. Our family, oh my gosh, and we can edit this out, but our family has the funniest story about him. When he was about 10, we said, it's time to get rid of the baby sized dresser. It didn't fit his clothing. It was literally falling apart. Super inexpensive piece of furniture. He had a nuclear meltdown that we were going to get rid of it and get him something that fit his big sweatshirts. So I said, okay, well, we're just going to move it to the garage. And my thought was, I'm going to move it to the garage. He's going to forget about it, and I'm going to take it to Goodwill.
Yeah.
So months go by, because that's what I do with the Goodwill pile. They're either in my garage or the back of my car. And months go by, and I'm getting ready to take it. Well, and I mean, 6 months later, I'm looking through my phone, looking through photos for some other reason. And I find in my phone that he snuck in the garage. He's 10 or 12. He's older. So it was kind of funny, and took selfies of him with his dresser, because he was so afraid it was going to be gone and he would miss it. He never told me he took these selfies with the dresser. And I mean, literally him with the dresser and the drawers open, and about 5 of them. And when I saw the photos, I was like, oh, this is traumatic for him. The thought that I'm getting rid of his baby dresser. So I didn't get rid of it. It now was in the garage, and we put the gardening tools and the hammers and all of the hardware. So I just felt like we cannot get rid of it, causing that much anguish. So in listening to you say, asking, what does it mean to you? I think that is an important question, because I don't know the answer, but it does cause so much trauma to his self to get rid of the empty, okay, he's really gonna kill me, empty Blistex chapstick thing. He used to, they get empty, and he'd line them up on the side of his dresser, and we couldn't move them. They had to be in a certain order, and we just couldn't disrupt it. So we learned to move around him, but 20 years later, I've got 6 bins of junk that I'm saving. Andrew looks like she's gonna cry.
No, I'm going to cry, because I have a child like that too.
Yeah.
And I
We
wasn't.
learned to
as
move
good.
around them.
But I love, Emmy, what your son did, that he took that selfie. I think that's amazing. And so again, important clue, and this is a strategy that we use sometimes with people, and it's actually been shown to be really effective in research, is taking pictures of items can help. It preserves that emotional connection and memory. And then and making even a book of memories, or with your daughter, Andrea, if you can show her pictures of the tree and her childhood, and helping our kids practice bridging that gap between memory preservation and then actually hanging on to all the physical items. And we can't do all pictures, and we can't do all physical, right? Because it will have to find some kind of balance, and really supporting our kids through that process. And there's, even methods that are used to help people practice that, because for some people it is very distressing to discard items, even the chapstick container, whatever it is. And then they really need to recognize that and do intentional practice of, I can tolerate the distress I feel over eliminating some of these items, but they have to be the ones making the choices and being in control. And we have to be supporting their process. So even if they, within reason, of course, we can't, some people I've seen actually rent storage units to avoid this distress
Yeah.
of not
That's what I
discarding their
did.
items. And that, that's one strategy, but just considering all the different aspects of the cost and, am I really enjoying the items now, or is it just really avoiding a difficult decision and a difficult, naming that, just saying, I know I'm going to experience some distress in this, but noticing that's not going to last forever. And I'm making space in my life for new memories and new opportunities, new hobbies, whatever it is. But that's something to approach with a whole lot of sensitivity and awareness, because it is really
Yeah.
difficult, and not making
Wow.
people feel shame, that's the way that's the way they work or function.
That is so, we could have talked an hour on that
I
idea
know.
of the attachment, and probably a little mini grieving in there for people who struggle with
Yeah.
that. I do the same thing, so I can relate to that. But yeah, that's so interesting to think about. When you keep asking the next level of why, you really get to a really interesting, surprising core.
And that's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's also been shown to try to take over that for our kids, and not give them those choices can actually make them deepen their commitment and attachment to those things and those beliefs, and it can make the problem a lot worse. So
Kind of like a relationship that you're not too fond of. You gotta tread water very, very.
proceed
Yeah.
with caution.
Proceed.
Proceed
Yeah.
with a lot of love and support and understanding and communication.
Yeah. Wow. Well, we're walking away with so much good information that I wasn't
Yeah.
even expecting that would come out.
Thank you so much, Anne. Lots of good information there.
Yeah. Thank you.
That's fun.